Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of our podcast. Joining Craig and I today is our special guest, Stuart Atkinson, Head of Procurement and Supplier Management at Morrisons Supermarkets. Stuart, would you like to say hello?
Hi guys, look, really great to be here, really exciting topic to discuss. So.
Yep, delighted to have you on board. And you're absolutely right, we've got a cracking topic for today. So the topic is IT transformation through the lens of a commercial leader. Now, for those of you who are regular viewers and listeners to our podcast, you'll know we're very often talking about technology topics. So we thought we'd take a walk on the wild side today and talk commercial just for one episode, and really just to give Craig a nice quiet day at the office.
Thanks for that, John. Appreciate it. No, I'm looking forward to getting involved with this conversation. I think, we do talk a lot about technology. We talk about lots about service towers in previous podcasts. So getting the commercial view, which is, as if not most important to many of our customers, is going to be really key today. And no better guy than Stuart to give some background and some insight into what's going on in the world in commercial.
Absolutely. That's why we're so pleased to have Stuart with us today. This is very much his specialist subject. So we're largely going to sit back, take it easy, ask him a lot of tricky questions, and no doubt he's going to wow us with a lot of interesting insight. No pressure.
The pressure. No, look, it's great. As I said, me and you have discussed this over many years. It's a topic that's really, really important to me. I think it's critically important to how you're going to deliver successful IT transformations and do them in the right way. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, IT transformation. It's a topic that I think in my time at TNC, and particularly over the last 5 years, there's not a customer that we don't walk into where there's some level of IT transformation going on. Now, I don't think a lot of the time it's through choice. I think it's been forced on a lot of organizations, whether that's through legacy infrastructures, whether it's through consumer demand, business pressure, economic pressure. There's so many things that are kind of feeding into the need to do IT transformation now. It's not optional. It feels like it's something that's been forced upon many organizations. I guess in your role as a commercial leader, how does that impact you? What's the kind of the planning process that you need to put in place to be able to address some of this change that's been forced upon businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you rightly point out, there's a significant change. Transformation is becoming more and more important. Technologies are moving on. Companies, particularly like Morrisons, where you've got a legacy tech stack. You've got to think about how you're going to migrate from those existing legacy solutions to actually the newer technology with AI, with data, how you're going to transform those kind of areas. And also particularly looking at the technology operating model as well, and how you can support the technology function going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that we see quite often is commercial involvement in some of these processes tends to be, towards the middle or the end of the process when they need to spend some money. I guess when we've worked with you in the past and some other customers as well, you're always very keen to get in at the front end to ensure that you steer that in a strategic approach, which is aligned to, business objectives and, what you're trying to achieve around return on investment. What do you think, your experience, not just in Morrisons, but previous roles and I guess across the board, what do you think are some of the inefficiencies that some customers, forget to think about, or some of the things they forget to think about in terms of commercial planning around IT transformation?
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point. I think quite often commercial, particularly procurement teams, can be seen as not really strategic, not really going to help and support. And they just need to be getting involved at the end and negotiating a deal. I see kind of the role of commercial to be a lot more important than that. And any teams that I put forward is our strategy needs to align with the overall technology strategy. And too often they don't think about the different stages, how they're going to get to the required end state without thinking things through. Then with very little commercial thought or thought about the operating models and the future state.
So if we're all agreed that for transformation to be successful, it needs to be a marriage between technology and commercial. One cannot, commercial can't progress on its own because it might buy something, at a great price that's not technologically aligned. And of course, vice versa, the technologist can progress forwards and try to implement something and get a terrible deal or whatever it might be. So the marriage is key. But how do you make that marriage happen? How do you how do you make sure commercial's there when the spark, ignites that something must happen? Or, do you wait for technology to come to you? Do you go to technology? Do you take ideas to them? How does that magic happen?
I think it's kind of a combination of all those things in reality. That if you're not tightly embedded with the technology function, what they're trying to achieve, where they're trying to go, then inevitably you're going to get a disconnect, and you're going to get engaged too late in the process. There isn't going to be the right level of trust between technology and procurement. And you're just doomed to fail from my side. I think you're absolutely right. It has to be a symbiotic relationship where you're having regular meetings with the CIO and the other senior directors of the team to understand exactly what their needs are and how your team can support those requirements.
And presumably, that's not just a kind of one-way street of you go meet the CEO and say, what are you thinking about doing? And I'll try and bring some commercial thinking to that. Presumably, you're also turning up to that with ideas. And
yeah, absolutely. You've got a view of the world and you're trying to shape that to a certain degree, because you think, actually we want to, if you think of the typical commercial considerations is how do you get to a smaller supplier ecosystem? How do you consolidate? How do you avoid duplicating unnecessary costs? Those become really quite important. You're trying to shape that whilst also being very cognizant of the how technology is trying to move itself forward, how it's trying to be innovative and actually drive business growth.
I think you touched upon a good point. There's a few things there in terms of procurement and the commercial team should actually be an enabler for IT transformation. I think we often come across organisations where, because they're not involved at the right stages of the process, they actually become a blocker. So you go through the process, you identify good technology, good suppliers, even have a good business case potentially, but you've got to work in strict rules around, we've got to do it this way, we've got to procure that way. So we tend to find that the lack of early involvement can delay a process quite significantly. I know when we've worked together in the past, and all the things that you've described there, sort of having that strategic alignment with the technology teams, making sure that they're following the right guidelines throughout the process and making sure that the outcome is the right outcome is key. But again, have you got what are the best practices around how this should be done? What are the things that customers should be avoiding? How can we get to that end state successfully?
So John and I share a very similar view of the world in that I think if you look at traditional procurement processes, might have been, we've got to follow those 7 steps. You've got to do the market analysis. You've got to do the vendor engagement, the RFI, the RFP, then tender award. That level of rigidity, I don't think works in the modern world. Partly driven by 2 things. One, you starting to see cloud and SaaS, which is, not necessarily predicated on you writing a ton of requirements because you can't bespoke the solution. I think better than going forward, the process I would tend to operate with teams is a much more iterative, much more collaborative process with the suppliers, because as well, the risk is you're hemming the supply base in. So too often if you could do the traditional, I'm going to do 1,000-line requirements for a particular project, but
and you get no bids.
Then you get no bids. But actually, worse than that, you actually, ultimately suppliers are salespeople, and salespeople will naturally not want to upset the customer because they believe that's what the customers want, even if they're wrong. I feel the more successful processes where you get the best outcomes are where you work with the suppliers and don't constrain and hand them in, and enable them to kind of shape where they think you should be going as well. For example, we obviously recently did a network tender together. We could have wrote something, we could have mandated and made it clear that SD-WAN was absolutely the right answer for us.
Yep.
But in doing that, we didn't give the suppliers freedom to say, actually, yes, probably, but not right now. And the right answer at this point is to go on in the MPLS direction, put the foundations in, and then consider a change.
See, it's a really, really good point. I know when we were, in previous conversations, I'm fond of using the term coalition building, but essentially what you're describing there is coalition building, that you're trying to get a group of stakeholders, internal, yes, your technology stakeholders, your business stakeholders, your commercial stakeholders, etc. But also, in that case, external stakeholders, bidders, partners, whatever term we want to use. You're trying to get everyone following a vision, progressing down a path. So, presumably, that's challenging to get that coalition together in the first place. Presumably, you've got to then keep that coalition together for some period of time. It doesn't take a day to do this, it takes some months. Can you tell us a bit about that process of trying to get the whole sort of ecosystem together?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it kind of goes back to like the beginning and the outset of an IT transformation. I think, as procurement people, we're naturally change focused, and it's quite easy for us to think, actually, I want to do this. And, it's going to get the right outcome, either reduce costs, better service, etc. I think you've got to have an empathy with the IT teams and the technology teams to say, actually, whilst they might think that they probably agree with you that change is the right answer, you've also got to bear in mind that change is costly. Change will dictate a lot of time and risk, resource, and going to delay them away from their day-to-day. And inevitably, any kind of IT transformation, there's going to be a period of instability. So there's got to be quite a lot of driver to kind of get that change going. So you've really got to be cognizant with the stakeholders about how you kind of continue to bring them on that journey and be empathetic to the fact that they have other challenges. And so you're absolutely right. You've got to always think about where they're at each different phase. How do you keep the momentum? How do you keep the energy going with the team to make sure you get to the right end state and the right outcome for the business?
I mean, I think again, we've talked a lot about change. Change is a constant now, isn't it? We started off by saying IT transformation is not optional; it's just something that's being forced on us. Change is the constant thing here. So this isn't something that just you do once and then you go have your holiday and do whatever and forget about it. It's something you do one, then there's another, and the parallel running all the time. There's a lot of change complexity in businesses today. So I think reflecting back on the discussion there around making procurement more agile. We talked a little bit about risk as well. I guess there's an element of maybe a bit more risk taking in the process now. There's a lot more technology vendors out there. Some are not as known as what the kind of traditional providers are. So we're starting to step into a world where there's probably more risk-based procurement activity going on. We certainly see that. Is that something that you're experiencing as well?
Yes, I think definitely. You're getting an explosion of lots of different software vendors, lots of different cloud and AI vendors coming in the market. I think the traditional models of your big IBMs, your big Oracles, I think we're definitely in a period of change and kind of transition that, and you have to be cognizant of that and build that into the process to make sure you're actually getting the right vendors involved in the process and being open to that level of risk with a number of different smaller vendors in the market.
So on that basis, what part does data play in the kind of decision making process and the risk analysis process? So I guess if you had access to some good data about the market up front, you could probably make some more informed decisions around the level of risk and the level of benefit and the approach that you're going to take. Is that increasingly important to be able to sort of drive more agility in procurement?
I think it's critical. I think my team will always bore me to say, one of the first things I'll say is, right, okay, draw me a view of what all of our competitors are doing. What do we understand about the market? You've got the likes of Gartner, Forrester. Understand what people are doing, how the market is moving. It's absolutely critical.
And presumably that's something, going back to that sort of coalition idea, that's the sort of thing that the commercial team can bring to the table and really add value to the technology teams who are perhaps looking at the world through slightly different lenses. And again, it's it's part of kind of that building trust, building relationships between the different parts of the different stakeholder communities.
Absolutely. I think definitely kind of procurement and alongside architecture can really help just understand exactly what's happening in the market, who are the new vendors, who are the established, and to kind of understand that level of risk from that side of things.
Do you envisage any? So we've kind of talked about this coalition of IT, architecture, procurement, commercial. Do you envisage any sort of future operating model that's different from the silos that we've got today? A slightly different culture around how we procure these services. We want to drive agility. We want to make it data based. But we see quite a lot that it's still limited by the fact that you've got these silos of people sat within teams. They don't really communicate that well. They've got different objectives. How do you kind of bring them? How do you drive a different culture within an organisation to sort of pull some of that stuff together to make it more agile?
I think from my perspective, that has to be led by the procurement team. Any procurement teams that kind of I build and I kind of work with, it's critical, that we're almost, when you're doing a sourcing project and kind of pulling people together, we're almost the project managers during that process,
You're
right?
Conducting the orchestra.
Exactly that, conducting the orchestra. About how do you pull the right people in, be it security to make sure that we're doing the right risk assessments, be it architecture to say, are we following the right principles? The business actually, is what we're doing, is it going to fulfill the right business needs?
Is there an element, I was making a note on something you were saying earlier, but it plays into what you're just saying about, you've got all these different teams. I know we've seen many times in the past when you've got misalignment of objectives between those teams. I mean, a classic one is, procurement's got a huge cost save target, whereas IT's got we've already got 50 projects on, we don't want the 51st. If you've got a fundamental lack of alignment in the strategic objectives for the different stakeholders, surely that coalition building becomes nigh on impossible. So at some level, you need some commonality of objectives, I would think.
I think that goes back to the original comments that we made around your procurement strategy has to align with technology strategy to enable proper prioritization of workload, both with my team, with technologies teams. Without that, you're kind of doomed to fail, because to your point, if you've got a misalignment on the strategies, then you're going to be struggling to get any buy-in with the technology teams, and it'll just be struggle to get any buy-in with the technology teams, and you'll just it'll be siloed working, and everything will break down, and you'll just have unsuccess. You won't move things forward.
You used the word empathy earlier. I think it's really interesting to hear that, because it's certainly one of the things we can hear from time to time is, vice versa, that, commercial people say, oh yeah, they'll never change from that supplier they've been with for years and years, and, or vice versa, that, the technology teams, the operational teams feel like, all procurement care about is the price, and, it doesn't matter how bad the solution is or how difficult it is to deploy or manage or whatever. That empathy, again, this must be a pretty key aspect of that kind of stakeholder management.
Yes. Actually, this goes back to pretty much my first job. The very first lesson I learned was to walk in another person's shoes. If you're gonna drive change, you have to understand and understand what the other challenges other people have. Cost savings and kind of getting the right cost models for the business is obviously critically important for procurement. For technology, it's really about delivering a stable service, driving innovation, and things. And so they're completely misaligned in that respect. So you need to be really cognizant of what they're trying to achieve to enable a successful program.
You mentioned cost models there. I think this is quite an interesting one as well. And we see customers wanting very different things these days. So what you may have wanted in the past in terms of commercially engineering deals, whether front loading to get some in-year savings, whether it's moving more things to CapEx or OpEx. Is that? Do you think that's sort of typical across the market? Is it obviously industry specific? Maybe. Are you seeing anything different now? We're moving more into as a service models and how they're going to have what impact they're having on, I guess, the commercial budget.
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of different things to unpack there. So I think in regards to how you engineer deals, I think that's probably true of most industries. I think if you think of the food retail market, which is high volume, low margin, you're always going to be heavily focused on EBITDA and making sure that you're keeping your costs as low as possible. So you will see a lot of those kind of tensions. I think separately to that, obviously the technology market is moving. It's moving a lot further away from, if you think back to the late noughties, early teens, it was very monolithic purchase on site, on premise teams. We're moving, to heavily CapEx focused. Now you're going to a lot more service driven software, and therefore it's putting a lot more pressure on the operating costs for technology. Ultimately it's still cash, but it is creating additional pressure kind of on the EBITDA.
And does that change the kind of strategy in terms of what IT can and can't do? Is there any new restrictions being put in place around, because it's moving more to sort of OpEx based, subscription based models, the potential impact on cash flow, that type of thing? Are there any constraints, restrictions being put in place or limiting IT transformation?
I think it's also then working with the other stakeholders, right? So you need to make sure that you're working with finance. So finance need to know that, you might have been spending £100 million on capital and £100 million on operating costs, but actually that needs to slightly bend and flex, and you're actually going to need to spend more on OpEx costs rather than CapEx costs. You'd hope that you're not driving decisions based purely off kind of cost models of different suppliers, because I think that takes you into the wrong direction. You have to move with where the technology market is going. Yeah,
I'm picking up on a common theme of collaborative working here.
Yeah, big time.
I think everything's centering around, everybody needs to be joined up here. There needs to be a strategic approach. The left hand needs to know what the right hand's doing. Good stakeholder management kind of drives success. And we talk about sometimes a lot of the challenges in this type of thing, but clearly there's successes as well. I think if done right, I guess there's two examples, right? If done right, you can generate a lot of commercial value for a business. If done wrong, you can potentially have a negative impact, and I guess you've seen both examples of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've been fortunate, and probably part of the reason why I've stayed with Morrisons for so long is that actually the engagement with technology has been it's been a really strong, positive relationship.
Yeah.
We've driven a lot of, I think, positive change over the last few years. But other places I've worked is you get that siloed working. Procurement are not involved at the begining, and the risk of failure definitely increases on those projects.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely, I'm sure, Craig, you've seen it plenty of times. I've certainly seen and heard it plenty of times. In some organizations, a sense from technologists that, bloody procurement, they're going to get in the way, they're going to slow it down, or we're going to talk about T's and C's for months. But also a sense of, well, we know what we should be doing. Oh, procurement are going to come along, they're going to want to run a tender, or they're going to want to, that sense of, I guess procurement as a blocker. And, what you've talked about very eloquently is, the relationship building to get around that. So, if you've got to that point, you've already failed, presumably.
Pretty much. I mean, I don't want to necessarily paint the perfect picture. The reality is there's still those bits, and actually technology suffers from the same thing, that the business won't actually even doesn't necessarily sometimes engage with technology, finds a technology solution that they then pass on to technology to then go and implement. So there are multiple layers of where, if you're not careful,
tough for everyone, right?
You are risking kind of either making the wrong solution decision, not being clear about what the implementation risks are, what the security risks are. All these things come into play if you're not joined up.
Yeah, I was going to say we've seen this both ways, and we've got a project that we're working on at the minute where it's been a procurement led activity with limited tech involvement. So it's a renewal of a contract. There's some technology refresh in there. Cost savings, excellent. Ticked all the boxes. Come back, give some money back into the business. Tried to deliver it from a technology point of view, and it's like, who's bought this? It won't work. So then you're back around the loop and you're back in a lot of complexity. So again, it's that lack of joined up thinking and strategic approach, which, if again not done correctly, can have a detrimental effect, I think.
So, given obviously we talked about a lot of the key sort of topics and approaches and so on, how you particularly go through sort of stakeholder management and so on. If you could boil down from your experiences, maybe the top 3 lessons you've learned over recent years of how to lead IT transformation from a commercial perspective, what do you think those 3 things would be?
Well, I think we've touched on some of them already, but I think if I'm looking for a technology category manager, someone I think is going to really drive that forward, I think there's the 3 key qualities I think I'd see is, look, being able to stakeholder manage, bring people on the journey is absolutely, is fundamental for any kind of procurement or supply management function. We don't have direct control over any specific decisions. We need to influence and kind of bring people along with us. So I think that's an absolute must. I think the other one for me is to have a deep category knowledge. Technology, probably similar to the marketing procurement strategies, you have to understand the category that you're working with. If you're going to get engagement with the relevant stakeholders, you need to understand the different technologies. You need to understand the language, so you can actually build those relationships. And I think lastly for me, and I think again we touched on it briefly before, a good procurement manager is also a good project manager. Being able to think, plan, how you're going to move from the first stage to the second stage to the third stage. I think during RFP processes, or tender processes, there's lots of opportunity to lose momentum. And if you're not careful and continually driving that forward, then the risk of failure or the risk of delay becomes ever present. So actually those project management skills as well are really important for any kind of procurement manager to be successful.
And presumably, given we've talked about how quickly a lot of these, particularly these technology categories, are moving, how quickly requirements can be moving, etc., that project management is never been more vital.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think if you kind of took the recent experience that we had kind of with the network tender, there were so many places where, if not done right and not pushed forward, then we could have easily stalled. We could have easily, the decision could have been 3, 6 months, 9 months. And then you kind of into actually, is it just easier to stay with the incumbent, and therefore making that transformation, making that change becomes really difficult.
And at that point, all of that work that's gone on up until that point has potentially been wasted. And so you really can't afford for that project management to fail.
Exactly. I mean, we've kind of talked about that coalition of the willing, and the longer time goes on, the more worried, the greater people perceive the risk of change, the greater the perception of cost, whether it's whether the juice is worth the squeeze. All these things start to come in, and doubts start to come in if you don't keep the right level of momentum throughout the process.
I think one of the things we've been seeing, across a lot of projects, again, coming back to this pace and so on, the CIO, CTO tenure seems to be getting ever shorter. Well, change a CIO halfway through your process, that's going to change the process. That's potentially going to slow things down. Obviously, the business environment is changing. So, we're seeing customers who have adverse results, nothing to do with the IT transformation, but off in the business somewhere, and that changes things. So presumably all of those things, they're all threats to the coalition.
Precisely, exactly that. There are constant changes. I think back to a transformation we did 4 or 5 years ago. We actually had 3 changes of CIO in that period, and each time that changed, you knocked another 3-4 months onto the process as the CIO comes in, wants to get up to speed before making such a big decision. So that it's important to keep the level of momentum going.
On the basis you probably don't have access to unlimited commercial managers, particularly good ones that can do project management and know the numbers and know the category and know the contracts and things like that. How do you go about managing the broad demand that the business and IT and other areas are throwing at you? What do you do to prioritize?
I think we've kind of touched on a few different elements already. I think the reality is you need to look at, what are you going to get your biggest bang for your buck? That could be either in costs, that could be in operational improvements, it could have been in business growth. You've got to put a lens over that and make hard choices about, what areas do you prioritize? But also you can, working with the team would create a multi-year plan. So maybe you won't do it this, but you kind of constantly in kind of almost like an agile methodology, you kind of have a backlog of stuff you want to do, and then you reprioritize over time as different projects come in and out.
And presumably that's where you're leveraging the category knowledge of your commercial people that you mentioned as a key attribute. Presumably this is where you're also leveraging market intel, because those would be the things that help you to assess, hey, this opportunity here might land us 10 million of benefit. This one over here is going to land 1 million of benefit. That insight from your people and from the market, etc. Presumably that's critical.
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamental. The more insight you have, the better you're able to think about, prioritize. Off the back of that, as we've kind of discussed, change has a lot of consequences associated with it. Having the right data to support what you're trying to achieve and whether it's going to be worth it in the end is critically important to the success and driving that project forward. And getting the buy-in of the different stakeholders to why to make sure that they're on board with you, that you're going in the right direction.
So I think looking forward, right? We've talked about a lot about bringing people together, data-driven type approach, accelerated agile processes, sort of risk-based outcomes. What do you see changing in the future? We've talked about business trying to do a lot of introduction of things like AI into the business side of things, but do you see there's a part to play for that in your world?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, John and I have had long conversations around this, around kind of our strategy and approach to kind of good procurement. What we've tried to do today is we've tried to build a set of principles and processes that are repeatable, that are reusable within different areas to hopefully then speed up that procurement process. And instead of being 9 months, we can deliver it in 6 months. I think going forward, and what we're already looking at is actually how can we use technology to speed that up even further. If you think about where some of the pain points are in regards to getting kind of transformation and procurement projects going, it's around that kind of requirements gathering. How can we leverage AI to understand the market, to actually help build a set of requirements to enable us to go faster? And obviously, as you then automate those processes even more, you can kind of pretty much automate the tender with analysis. And you're also starting to see technology, which we're looking at, is almost like negotiation being done through AI, through the use of bots to kind of do some kind of negotiation. Now I think it's probably in its infancy and it's going to be small things at this point, but this is only going to gather pace, and it enables us to then free up it's going to enable us to then free up procurement people to do the things that are really important about building the right category plans, working with the technology stakeholders to prioritize, to then drive further technology transformation.
And I guess that acceleration has so many benefits. Obviously, there's a benefit of, if you can complete something in 6 months, not 9 months, you can do more of them with a given team and therefore for a given cost, etc. So, that's a tick. Presumably also you get to the benefit quicker. If you complete it 3 months sooner, you get 3 months more savings or more operational benefits or whatever it is. But I guess as well, again, going back to our coalition concept, the shorter you have to keep that coalition together, the less likely it is to fracture. So the more processes you're going to complete whilst everyone's focused on those objectives. So I guess that acceleration, tech-enabled, albeit, is a win in lots of ways.
Oh, absolutely. It's ultimately, it's a no-brainer, really. It's just having confidence and trust in that technology and building the right investment case with the business to actually to get that investment. Us, like every other function within the business, is kind of striving for the investment dollars, and it's building the right business case that's going to underpin that.
I mean, ultimately, it introduces yet another skill set, doesn't it, into the commercial manager's role. They've got quite a lot of hats to wear today. They need to be commercially astute. They need to understand the market, the category. They need to be able to run processes. They need to understand the contract. They need to be able to negotiate. It's quite a big role. And I think although AI might be able to help augment and do some of the legwork around that, the intelligence still needs to sit with the commercial manager.
Exactly. This is really more about enablement, whether in the future, I'm sat on a beach and the AI is doing all my job for me. That's the theoretical utopia, right? But I think at the moment it's really going to be about freeing up the procurement manager to do the stuff that adds real value, and actually using AI to kind of speed up the process, get the business outcomes faster. Is going to be, that's where the real value in the kind of, certainly in the short to medium term.
Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot with customers about time to value. Ultimately, procurement processes are difficult, right? They take a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of resource, and cost to a certain extent. But most people just want to get to value as quickly as possible. So how do we get to a position where, using tools, using data sets, using optimized processes, we get time to value much quicker, we execute it, we get the outcomes that you're trying to achieve? That's something that, I think the market needs right now. And we're obviously starting to develop some capability around that space. But, I think everything that you've talked about today lends itself to getting there quicker, safer, managing the risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Stuart, you talked a lot about category leadership and category knowledge and so on. How does a category leader keep up with what's going on in their category? What would you expect from one of your category leads? How would they maintain that thought leadership, that knowledge, et cetera, et cetera? What would you be expecting from them?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think that, look, there's obviously solutions out in the market. You got the likes of Gartner, Forrester, to try and understand where the emerging technologies are coming and kind of leveraging and using, making use of that information is open to you. Additionally, going to different conferences, understanding exactly what new technology is coming down the line. I think that's important. I think additionally, I would always expect, and something that I've always done, is kind of reach out into your peer community, understand what other people are doing, understand what your competitors are doing. And then lastly, for me, I think it's kind of also understanding where your gaps are, and where relevant, reaching out to external third parties to kind of try and give you that extra kind of support. Kind of, as have a lot of knowledge in different areas within technology, but the one thing I've always been quite open with is networks are not my skill set. It's kind of niche in itself. So hence why we've kind of engaged yourself to kind of help support us on those processes to help drive the right business outcome, because we need that level of specialist knowledge that we don't currently have internally.
And do you find there's lots of other categories like that? Are there particular other niches you think, or is networks a particular?
I think networks is particularly unique. I think the other one would probably be around outsourcing services. Obviously it's your crown jewels, and sometimes you might need to lean on additional support to kind of to help deliver that kind of a strategy.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Stuart and Craig, I think we're approaching the hour where we've got to wrap it up. Partly because it's boiling in here, partly because I think we've asked all the questions and we've squeezed you dry. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us. It's been really interesting listening to you. Thank you, Craig, for your insights as always. More eye candy than thought leader today, but it's been great to share it with you. And look forward to you joining us for our next podcast soon.